Dean Gillis, thank you for joining us. Your first thoughts as you greet the new Pope for the first time with all of us.
Well, he was not the front runner, that's for sure. I think everybody knows that. But in the last conclave, he was a candidate. So it's said that he came close last time and lost out to Cardinal Ratzinger. He's a Jesuit, the first Jesuit. That's kind of. I happen to be at a Jesuit university, Georgetown University, so there'll be some rejoicing here with that. And the choice of the name Francis is interesting. Had Sean O'Malley, the Cardinal Archbishop of Boston, been chosen, it would have been a natural. But I think he chose the name Francis because of the simplicity of St. Francis's life. And he himself has lived a very simple life, living in a rather unadorned apartment, even as the Archbishop.
And as I understand, St. Francis of Assisi was the son of a wealthy merchant who eschewed all that, as you point out, for a life of humility. Why do you think we've not seen previous popes identify themselves with that same role?
You know, I don't know. It's a very good question. I don't know why no one's ever picked up the name of Francis. Maybe because the popes have lived in somewhat of splendor, but I can't imagine that. I mean, I think most of them, even though they live in a glamorous place, they have a modest salary and a relatively simple lifestyle. So it is strange that no one has ever selected the name.
And while Christina mentioned the fact that he did speak very fluent Italian, the choice from Argentina, what does that say to you?
Well, the fluent Italian part is an important part. If the person did not speak Italian, and I think English as well, I don't think he'd be a likely candidate. That you need to run the Vatican and to address the world. So that was an advantage. But he's been around Rome a good deal. He's been on a lot of the congregations in the Vatican. So he knows his way around the Vatican. He's familiar with the key personnel of the Vatican, and he's comfortable in Italian. That's obvious. So he's not such an outsider.
Professor Gillis, let me ask you about the theology of the new Pope. Do we know where he stands as it relates to the communion and liberation theology? Do we know where he sits in terms of the theological direction of the Church?
Well, he has not favored a liberation theology in Latin America. There was a period in the 1960s and 70s when even bishops were favoring a liberation theology, and then Rome somewhat cracked down on liberation theology and also put in more conservative bishops who weren't in favor of that. He'd be among that crowd.
Dean Gillis, as you point out also, he was a front runner several years ago when Pope Benedict XVI was chosen. What do you think it is about his theology that this time around was what the rest of the cardinals wanted to see in a pope?
Well, I think his theology is relatively conservative, as they all are, but his stance on social justice is fairly progressive, and he's been a champion of social justice in Latin America. So I think that combination is a happy combination for the Church and a happy combination for cardinals. That's something they were looking for.
Dean, it's Michael McKee. There's an interesting situation here in his age. He is 76 years old. They didn't go particularly young. And after the resignation, the abdication of Pope Benedict, this does suggest that we might see not a very long-lived papacy here. I
think you're right, and that surprised me a little bit. I thought they would. I didn't think they'd go in someone in his 50s, but I thought mid-60s to early 70s. This is a little older than I would have thought, and it means that you're going to have, as you just suggested, a relatively brief papacy, maybe a tenure, could be longer with our health and longevity, but it won't be an extended papacy, and they seem to be comfortable with that. And I can't say that's a new model because we've had some lengthy popes, but John Paul was, I think, 23 years in the papacy. Maybe they didn't want someone in there that long this time.
Professor Gillis, when you say he was who isn't a fan of social justice, but in what ways was he a fan of social justice in Latin America?
Well, in one way, first of all, the fact that he even eschewed the high lifestyle that some bishops could lead and lives in a modest apartment himself is an example to the people. He lives among modest people. He comes from a modest background, apparently. He's one of 5 children, and his father was a railroad worker, so he doesn't come from any kind of blue blood background himself. And the people whom he serves in Buenos Aires, many of them are poor, and I think identifying with the poor is a very important part of the gospel. I think that's something that he, in his own lifestyle, literally he has done. He doesn't have a chauffeur limousine. He makes his own meals. He lives rather simply and very modestly.
It's great tidbits, great information that you share with us. What else can you tell us about the Argentine church specifically and how it fits in, what features it has, what makes it unique from South America and from some of the older European Catholic churches?
Well, it has a European flavor, as we just suggested. Argentina has a lot of connections to Europe, so it's not so radically different from Europe. But it's not. It's a powerful church, but not as powerful, should we say, as Brazil, which has just a lot more Catholics. And anybody in Latin America has been fighting a battle between Catholicism and evangelical Protestantism that has been attracting Catholic followers to move to the evangelical churches. And that's a real challenge for the church, not only in Latin America, but globally. It's the same as happening in Africa to some degree. And so someone who's aware of that challenge would be an advantage to the church.
And Dean, before we thank you and let you go, one final question, and that is, how long before we start to see some sort of doctrinal outline, if you will, from the new Pope and where he intends to lead the church?
I think you'll know that. I think you know it by his history pretty well. And I think the doctrinal outline would be very consistent with Benedict. I don't see any changes there. At some point, he'll do his first encyclical, which will give you some idea of his theological ideas. But that may take a year for it to develop.
Understood. Chester Gillis, the Dean of Georgetown University, also a professor of theology. Thank you, Dean, for joining us. Wonderful to have your insights, sir.